and today we'll be talking about AngularJS. My name is Arun. I'm from the Hollywood team. This is the agenda. We'll be going over with what and why of Angular. We'll be looking at the basic flow of Angular, how Angular actually plugs in and starts working. Some core concepts. Batarang is a Chrome plugin for Angular. We'll be looking at some advanced concepts and ending with how you can test your app, how you can write your app so that you can test it well. So what is Angular? Angular is a client-side framework written purely in JavaScript. So you don't require jQuery to run it. You're not. Okay. So you don't require jQuery to run this. The aim of Angular was it was primarily developed to write SPAs, single page applications. So Gmail is a good example. You don't see complete page refreshes anywhere. You just see parts of the pages getting refreshed. But that's the primary aim of Angular. It follows MVC pattern, so it gives you clean separation, model view controller separation. It uses HTML as the template for the view, so all your HTML knowledge can be ported, and your HTML is ubiquitous. Every browser, every device supports it, so you're benefited there. So why do we use Angular? Now these are not the most unique, compelling things. Only Angular does them kind of thing, but these are some of the reasons, and some of them are actually unique. So you can add custom elements to your HTML, right? So you can say I want to create a grid, and you can actually add a grid element on the page. And Angular, you can teach your browser how to do new tricks. So Angular will tell the browser how exactly to render that element. So for example, you are working on an address book, so you want to show a bunch of contacts. So the first page will just show, the default view will just be a name. So when you hover over it, you get a pop-up, and then it shows more details. You click on it, it'll take you to edit mode. All those things can be done with jQuery as well, but Angular is more separate, because the next point is that DOM manipulations on service calls are separated. So the DOM manipulation is a complete separate thing. Service calls are separate thing. So how do we do it in jQuery? So if we want to get some network information from server information and update our UI, we make a AJAX call. Once we get the data, we run business logic onto it, and then we say, okay, that's my final data. I'm going to update my DOM. So the problem with that is your network logic, your network calls, your server, your business logic, and your DOM manipulation is all clubbed into one piece, right? So with Angular, we will see that DOM manipulation is a completely separate thing, and network calls are completely separate thing. They are testable. That makes both of them testable. Angular sets up listeners for user events. So if you have worked on MVVM or observer pattern, this is pretty much what it's doing. So Angular does those event registrations for us. That way we don't have to worry about them. We can set up routing. So when we say when the user is on this particular URL, do a specific thing, we can do dependency injection. Those are some of the advanced features of Angular. There are other frameworks similar to Angular where if you want to create your own data model, you'll have to inherit from specific objects. Like Ember is one of them, where you'll have to create your data models are inherited, and they have their own. You have to create specific behaviors in that same flow. But in Angular, your data models are plain old JavaScript objects. That's what POJOs are. We have POCOs, plain old CRL objects. So very similarly, these are just data models. You don't have to inherit from any special thing. Being a client-side framework cannot help too much with security issues, and you don't want to do a lot of secure things on the client side, because I can just go to your dev tools and say, is secure or is authorized user equals true. I can just do that and hack the entire system. So most of the security things it's better to be done on the server side. So you would want some kind of a service that will do that for you. There are a couple of things that Angular does, and the rest of it just works with your server. We'll see how Angular is quite testable. I mean, it's really easy to write unit tests and end-to-end tests in Angular. Okay, so the anatomy of it, the actual flow of it is user makes a request on the browser, HTTP connection is made, server sends back the, let's say, the index.html page containing your template. I'm not calling it DOM yet. We'll see why. And then there is a script reference for Angular on this page. So it gets loaded, and Angular waits for the DOM content loaded event that gets loaded in the browser. And then it looks for an attribute called ng-app. So what it does is, once it gets this ng-app, it says, okay, that entire section is what I have to look at. And then it walks through the elements in between those elements. So if you have ng-app on the HTML, it says the entire page is mine. Or you can say, well, I only want Angular to take care of that small section of mine, so I'll put it on a div. So between the starting and ending of those divs is what Angular works on. Once it does that, it starts walking through the elements, and it looks for bindings and directives. So bindings, again, if you have done any observer pattern work, it just tries to see where all do I need to set up those registers. Sorry, where all do I need to set up those listeners? I have to register some listeners so that anytime user makes a change on the UI, your model has to get updated, or if it's an async thing and your model gets updated in the back end, it has to be updated on the front end. So all those listeners are set up. Kind of like KO, right? The data binding part, that is basically what it is doing, that data binding. And then it looks for directives. Now, directives are a very feature of Angular. There are hours and hours of sessions to directives. There is a book completely. But at the base, at the core, what a directive is directives are DOM. You just manipulate DOM. So that is what I was talking about in the previous slide. Your DOM manipulations and so on are completely separated. So directives take care of all your DOM manipulations, and server calls are done by other pieces of info. Okay. Now, then obviously you'll continue getting initial data from the server. The data comes to the client side. Angular has the template now, the initial index.html page. It gets the data. It does the assembly of it. Assembles the data along with your template, and then provides that final DOM. That's the actual DOM. It provides that to the browser and says, hey, browser, go and run it. Okay. We'll see an example of this one. Just run the code first. Okay, so what I have here is just a text box. So just keep observing. So as in when I start typing, right? So the bottom, it's a p tag that is getting updated as and when I type, right? And as soon as I remove everything there, that line is actually hidden. So let's see what the code is doing. Okay, so let's go through the flow now. Just ignore the comments for now. So that your browser receives that entire HTML, and then there is a reference for Angular here. So that gets loaded. It waits for the DOM content loaded. As soon as it's done, it looks for that ng-app. In this case, it's there on the HTML, so it takes care of. It says I have to walk through the entire HTML page. So that's basically what it starts doing. And up until that point, there is nothing that Angular has to do. That's plain old HTML. And there we have something called as ng model. So what this one is saying is there a model called as name, right? So just think of this this concept of a context, right? Is there? So it's basically asking that context. Hey, context, do you have a property or a model called name? If no, then add it. If yes, well, if no, add it, and then I'll register all the bindings. So that's basically what's happening on the page here. That is your name model. So anything I type in here actually gets saved into, if you're thinking in line of coding, it's like context.name equals Angular. So that's your data binding happening there. And then the next line says, say hello to name, and that is the double curly, I think it's called as double curly syntax interpolation. That's saying, hey, context, the elusive context that we have here. It says, hey, context, get me the value of the name property. And that's what is getting saved here, right? So that is like the read write, and that is only the read. Okay, so that's just reading from your reader model, whereas here it's you're writing and reading, right? You can do both of them there. Now ng show here is an attribute from Angular, and anything that says ng hyphen it belongs to Angular. That's the namespacing thing that they have. So it basically says show this entire element only if there is a non-empty string value in the name property. And that's the reason why you don't see it when there is nothing here, and the moment you start typing something, it shows up. So if you look at the HTML of it, there, hold on, let me just make this bigger. Okay, so there is that ng hide class, and if you look at that, it says display none. You see the moment I type something there, ng hide is gone and it's displayed as a block. Right? So Angular is doing all of these things for us. Okay. Now going to the next one, ng cloak. Right? Let's see what that one does, and for that we'll walk through the timelines of the page loading in the browser. So the browser gets all this HTML, right? Just comment that. Okay, so the browser gets all of this HTML, and the browser says I can actually render what that is, because that is string for your browser, right? And then your Angular loads, it gets the ng app, and then it starts walking through. That's when it sees this ng show. Oh, I should hide ng show, because I should hide that element because name doesn't have any property. So for a split second, you are actually seeing that string on the page, right? So in this case, there is only one, but if you have multiple, you will have a degraded UI experience, and that is actually called what you are. Let me just show this on the page, right? So I'm going to refresh the page. Look at that. You're seeing that, and it's gone. Right? So what I did there was go away. Okay. So what I did there was I'm loading a bunch of JavaScript files. I'm not needing them, but I'm just loading them to delay Angular loading in. Right? So that what you saw there was, it's called as FOUC, flash of unstyled content. It's kind of a again, your UI looks like too flashy on the page, right? So in order to avoid that, what you do, and let's just go to what the other part of the script is doing. So I've put a listener on the DOM content loaded event. So as soon as that fires, you'll see that in the console. And then I'm saying, hey, get me that element, the output element, the ID with output, and then see if it has an ng cloak attribute on it. Okay. Obviously, in this case, it's false because I don't have anything. And then after Angular loads, I have another function that runs after half a second. It says again doing the same thing, and now check if there is an ng cloak in there, and then pull out the class names. Okay, so that's what I'm doing, and let's go to the console. I'm just going to do another refresh. So the first one, it says false. Now all the other JavaScripts are getting loaded and downloaded and parsed, and then your DOM fully loaded and parsed event gets fired. After that, Angular kicks in, and look at that, it's still saying false, so that it doesn't have the ng cloak attribute on it. And then at the end it says Angular has added those two classes for us. That is what hides that p element. Right? Now I'll go ahead and add the ng cloak. Now if I refresh the page, you're not seeing that element anymore, right? The page is still loading, but you're not seeing anything. And then on the console, you're seeing true there. This is the first one that ran that says, okay, I'm seeing the ng cloak attribute. But the second time your Angular runs it, the second script runs, that is false, right? Because Angular has removed it, and because it has removed it, because it has added the ng hide class on it, right? So that is what ng cloak does. That's just the demo I just wanted to give, and in that demo we just saw how Angular actually starts working on your page. Okay, we did not see, well, we saw some DOM manipulation happen here. Your ng show is a DOM manipulator, right? It is manipulating DOM at specified times. Actually, anything in Angular that is ng hyphen that you have put on the page is a DOM manipulator. So that's why any ng hyphen is called as a directive, right? So Angular is full of directives. Your ng model was also a directive. So it said, I'm going to watch this model. Anytime there is any changes, I'm going to fire the event so that the listener gets them and updates them, right? So that was the basic example I wanted to give. We didn't talk about that one, and we haven't talked about the final DOM being prepared, right? Any questions so far?
Yeah, you put it at the HTML level,
right?
If I want to do it only for the portion,
right?
If I want some control,
right?
some section, so you put that ng app into that control.
That's all it is. So I can put it on the body tag. I can put it. I can create a div here and then wrap this whole thing, this entire section. I can wrap it inside a div and put it there.
But still, we are still going to put the script in the bottom of the page.
Yeah, scripts are always at the bottom of the page, right? I mean, I don't want the loading of the page to be stopped by scripts.
Once you load the page and apply the.
Yes. So Angular, what it does is once Angular downloads and is ready to parse, and it's ready in the browser, it actually walks down the DOM looking for that ng app. Right? Doesn't matter where it is. It starts from the top, and once it gets ng app, says, okay, that is what I'm going to. That is the only thing I'm going to control. Right? Anything else?
If something else, if I'm downloading images after the script,
right.
The script will be the extreme.
Well, see, the default practice is styles at the top, scripts at the bottom. There's not just Angular, this is any JavaScript. Anytime you're doing any web development, you want to put scripts at the bottom because scripts block execution of, scripts run on the main thread, so they block HTML execution. So you want to put it at the bottom, that way user is at least seeing some content.
And see, it's better like when you want to manipulate anything in DOM manipulation, once DOM is there, then
once the DOM is there, then you
then
can
only
start.
you can manipulate it, right? So it should always be in the end.
Right? So that's the reason why the scripts are always kept at the bottom. Okay?
If you check YSlow, there is a plugin called YSlow. It will tell you the same thing.
It'll a lot of things. A lot of things like that. Okay, moving on. So core concepts of MVC. So we saw this name, this concept thing, right? The concept is actually called as the context that we were referring earlier. It's actually called a scope. Right? Angular has created this object called scope, and all your models are actually attached to your scope. So earlier when we saw the code, your name is actually getting attached to scope. So when I said context.name, it was actually scope.name. Right? Now scope is critical because anytime it is the object that sits in between your view and the controller. Right? So anytime there is an update on the view, it's the scope object that is holding your model, and the model gets updated, and then that's ready for your controller to use. The same way on the other side. So if a controller for some reason does some network calls and gets updated data, it updates your model, and then your views get updated.
So that means it implement an observer pattern on top of that.
So good point. So the reason why I said mostly here is because there are some people, because of the scope object, there are some people who are saying that this is an MVVM pattern. Right? So on a humorous note, what one of the guys at Angular said, you know what? Don't fight over whether it's MVC or MVVM.
Say MV star.
No, they said MVW.
MV star.
They said MVW, which says model, view, and whatever it is that you want to call it. The kind of
that is the same.
yeah. So it's MV star, whatever you want to call it, kind of a thing.
So I think the main thing is have a separation of concern, right?
Right. So that's what it is. Okay. So your model is attached to the scope. We'll see where scopes are coming from and things like that. The view you saw was plain old HTML. Your controllers are JavaScript functions, plain old JavaScript functions. It's just that they're created in a different way, but they're pretty much your JavaScript functions. So there are three unique things about Angular. They're called as the 3Ds: data binding, directives, and dependency injection. We saw one-way data binding in our example. So from the view, it is going to the scope. We'll see two-way later on.
So how data binding is different compared to knockout? Is it same way, or is it like?
The internal implementation, I'm not sure, but Angular. So KO gives you only DB, only data binding.
Okay.
Right? Angular does a whole lot of other things around it.
Angular is a complete.
It's a framework. It's a framework.
KO is more of a data binding. And
it's kind of a library, right? It just gives you that one page. Okay. Now directives. As I mentioned, directives are really unique, and they are basically DOM manipulators. Right? Now, to give an example, you have a requirement where you want to create meeting invites. You want your employees to be able to create meeting invites. Ignore Outlook for a moment. So what you say is, you have the business requirement says meetings cannot be created more than 2 months in advance. Right? That's one of the business rules. And then they say, okay, you have to disallow people from setting up meetings on holidays. Right? Kind of obvious, but you still want to disable that. So what you do is you say, okay, jQuery UI provides a date picker, a date time picker, or a date picker, date time picker, whatever it's called, right? And then you just go on extending it. Says, okay, I'm doing an Ajax call to get that cutoff time, right? 2 months, 3 months, whatever cutoff time, and then you'll say I'll put that as the end date for my date time picker, right? And then you'll do another network call and say, okay, what are the company holidays? Right, those are like 3 holidays in the next until the next month end, and then once you get back that data, you will add your Saturdays and Sundays, make that a big collection, and then disable all those dates in that date picker, and that's it. So you're allowing the user to select the date. Again, the problem here is you have added business logic, you have added network calls and all those things in just one function, right? If you want to do it the directive way, your scope has 3 properties: your cutoff date, right, the 2 months cutoff date; your company holidays, which will also include the Saturdays and Sundays. Someone somewhere is populating them, and then your view will just say, I'm just reading that, setting the values, and then when user selects a value, I'm setting a date selected property on the scope. Now that makes your directive completely reusable, and it's completely agnostic of where the data is coming from. Right? So that is the power of directives. Dependency injection. How do we do dependency injection in .NET? There is an IOC. We say, hey IOC, you're in code. So if someone asks for iLogger, give them this event logger. Your requirements changes. You say, hey IOC. If someone asks for iLogger, give them this DB logger. Right? On the testing side, you say, hey IOC, you're in the test context now. So if someone asks for iLogger, give them the fake logger. Right? That's how you set up in .NET. In Angular, there is no IOC per se. It's not strongly typed. So what you do is you inject the actual resource into the calling code. Right? You're making a network call. You inject the HTTP provider, which is provided by Angular. That is the one it's a wrapper on all your Ajax calls. Right? So it makes all the Ajax calls easy, and you pass that service directly. And on your test side, Angular has provided a HTTP backend provider, where it's a fake one, right? So you have to set up the expectations for that. So that's how dependency injection works. I said Angular does not require jQuery. There is a subset of jQuery functions, has class, add class, remove class, kind of thing. There are a subset of them that are inbuilt into Angular. It's called as JQLite. If you want jQuery, you just load jQuery assembly before Angular loads. That way it will start referring to jQuery, right? We'll take a look at another example now. So here I'm seeing a bunch of products, and there is a total information there, right? So let's see what the code is doing. It seems like pretty obvious thing. I mean, it's actually just a table, right? It's just a table with header, footer, and the body element, right? So let's see what is actually happening there. I'm going to the controller. So first thing I'm saying, create me a module. I'm asking Angular to create me a module. Module is not a namespacing mechanism. Think of it just as a general container, right? And then you're saying inside that container, create me a product controller, right? So that is creating an instance of your product controller, and then it gets an instance of scope. Now, every application has gets a root scope object, right? Anytime you're calling this controller, the root scope creates a new instance of scope and passes it on to your controller, right? This is the scope. So what I'm doing here is I'm just adding a bunch of products here. That might as well be a network call, the result of a network call. And then I'm adding that model onto my scope, right? So all of these products are now referenced here. Let's go to controller example. Again, I have my AngularJS, I have my product control referenced, and then that is the module name that I created earlier, that I referenced earlier. So Angular starts working, and then it comes to this point where it says, I mean, this looks pretty much like a for each syntax. For each product in scope.products, repeat this entire structure, right? That's why you have 9 rows of 2 columns each, right? So it's showing the product name and description. And so if you see the product name, the data that is getting set up, it says it has name and description, right? And in the total, in the footer, I just have one entry that says, again, I'm doing the double curly syntax here. So I'm saying scope.products. I don't have to mention scope everywhere. Scope.products and length, right? So it shows me the length of the collection. So this is how you're, oh, there's one more piece. Look at that, right? Now that is telling me that the the product controller is the one that takes care of the body tag. Anything inside the body tag will be controlled by product controller.
We can put multiple controllers.
Yes, you can have nested controllers, you can have child controllers, all those things. All those things are available. Okay. Any questions on this? So it's,
I will ask a question. What is not this? I think it's
okay. Right. So let's make this. Let's add some features onto this one. I want to be able to, let's say, search within the responses that I've got. Okay. Again, we are using the same ng model, so that adds the search property or model onto the scope object. So whatever I type in the search property gets saved into the search property in the scope, right? And then I'm going to use an Angular syntax here. So that is telling me that any value that is there in here, search for that value in the product model. So it will search in the name and in the description, right? I don't need that anymore, right? Oh. So laptop, the word laptop is there in the description for the first two, and it's there in the name for the third one. So it does the filter for them, right? Those are two cameras. When I search for mouse, so it's basically saying, hey, look for the word laptop in the product model, whether it's in the name or the description. If it's there, include it. If not, just exclude it. Okay. Now, one of the things here is that is not getting updated, right? So I'm still, when I do that, it's still showing me the total count. That's because I have to filter, I have to provide a filter there as well. Right? I can, so now it's doing filter on two sides, right? It's doing the same logic on two places, right? Okay. It's doing the filter on two sides, so I can just create an can create that, and in here I just say should still work there. Right? Now I'm doing this filter only once, and I'm just reusing that variable. Right? So any questions on this?
So such is an inbuilt function of Angular.
This is only searching the client side.
Yes,
It's only searching on your scope. It's not doing any network calls. Although you can fire up events and do all those things.
What if you want to say only search the name column?
Syntax thing. I don't know if I'll get that syntax right. Let me try that. Name :search. I don't know. I'm just trying some. No, that's not the right thing either. So that's basically what you say. So you have a way to say, do that search inside. I don't know. Try this one. No, I don't know. Oh, okay. Let's try that now. There you go, Shan. It's working. Thanks, Himanshu. So now it's only looking for in the name. So I just had to say filter in the name property and then do a search. Right. Okay. Now I have some animation. I have some animation already in this, right? So I'm calling a repeated item. So if I go here, I have some animation here, right? So transition, and then I have opacity changing and all those animations. And I'm using the Angular style of animation. Angular 1.2 has animation built into the framework. So you see ng move, ng enter, ng active, ng leave. All of these are, events. And I have the animate library also included, but I don't see any animation here, right? The reason is your module has no clue what to do with that, right? Now I'm injecting the animate library, ng animation library, into your code, and then can I do a refresh? Look at that. Now we are seeing some animation there. Okay, fair enough. So you just got animation inbuilt with your Angular. Let me change that piece here. Okay, right. So any questions so far? Oh yeah, all browsers, because it's built on
I think the older browser 5 didn't support, right?
7 and below. I think will have issues. 7 and below will have, I think it will have issues. So we saw we have seen directives. We saw dependency injection. I just injected ng animate into the calling library, right? The calling code. Batarang is a plugin for Chrome that helps you do some debugging. It will help you see the scope object. It will show some. It will show the dependencies and some performance information. I've already had that installed. So look at that AngularJS there. Make it bigger. So once I enable it, look at that is my entire scope object, right? That's my entire scope object. Those are the filtered products. And the moment I start typing something here, right, the filtered products are becoming only 3 because it's filtered, and your products is not changed because you're not changing anything in the product. And each of them, you can see each of those models, each product, and that product is getting that name from there. So if I make it P1 and P1.name, P1.description, you'll see P1 here. That's where it's getting the product name from, right? And you see this back arrow here. You see this back arrow here. So that is actually pointing to this latitude 3300. Okay. I can click on that. It'll take me to the DOM. Right. Now on this page, you see something called as Angular properties, right? And that is the ID that we saw in the AngularJS page and Batarang plugin. So those are the IDs that it's actually pulling. Right? That's how Angular knows what to update and where to update, right? So you're seeing a good bunch of information about your scope on the user side. So that is your product, and you have a description and a name. Okay. What I can do is I can select that as the current one. I can say scope.product. That'll give me that object. I can say set that. It's still not changed because I have to call this special method. There you go. Now it's changed. Now it's XYZ here, right? So this is purely client side. There are no network calls or anything like that happening. You have the entire scope object with you. What I can do here is I can go ahead and say right now I have explicitly added the search product property on your page. The page works just the way it is. There is no changes there, right? All the same things are same, but if I just say sorry, so you're kind of seeing two-way binding now. It's there in the controller. I mean, the controller set the value. You're seeing it on the page, and then I update it on the page. You're seeing it back. And then if I go back here, I should be seeing the search value, right? So it's gone, and then I can whatever I'm typing, it's live, right? So this plugin kind of helps you do a lot more with debugging and seeing why you are seeing all this information. It provides some options for us. Come on. You can show bindings. So those are the bindings that we did. Product, double curlies, product name, and things like that. It shows you a scope. Your scope is complete, the controller, the body tag, whatever scope. So on the page, that is your scope now, so the entire body. That's why it's just highlighting the entire page here. And then your application is the entire application from HTML to HTML. So that is Batarang. We will look at, it gives you some performance information also. So there it is saying that product name and product description, binding them is taking like 2 milliseconds and things like that. So the moment you start seeing UR functions taking a lot more time, you can start working on them. You can start fine tuning them. Okay. Any questions?
So this is only for Chrome. This plugin?
Yes. So sorry, Angular is a Google product, right? So that's the reason why they have done it first for Chrome. I don't know if they're going to do it for others, but it seems like they will, because people are still using multiple browsers. It's open source. Angular is open source, so eventually. Batarang, yeah, they'll probably start writing those for others as well. Okay, some of the advanced concepts. You can set up routes. I mentioned earlier. If the user is on the home page / then you can say back it up with this controller and use that template. Use some. So if you're showing a list of products on the page, you can say the template that will be used is list.html. You can set up saying if the user goes to new, then new controller, and use the input form.html, whatever, right? So you can set up routes like that. So you can create services in Angular. Now, the typical way is model doesn't contain any business logic, right? Your views are dumb, your controller is thin, your directives are doing only DOM manipulation. All the heavyweight lifting is done by your services, right? Business logic, server calls, all those things are done by services, right? There are three ways. Well, there are more than 3 ways actually, but the 3 common ways of creating services are provider, factories, and service. It's kind of in the provider is the most configurable way, and service is the least. So if you want very simple service and it doesn't require much setup, you can do a service. If you want complex, if you have complex creation logic or instantiation logic of your service, then you can use the provider. In the next example, we'll be seeing.
So one question here: what is the benefit of, in place of using web API, I have to use the service?
So your service will be the one that will be making those calls, right? It will be doing the network call. So where else are you going to do service calls? Controller is not the right place. Service is the place. So that's why kind of service is like the dumping ground. If you don't know where something goes, create a service and just do the call there.
So wrapper.
Yes, right. Angular gives us some kind of caching. So in a typical web application, what happens? You make a request. It goes to the server. I'll just take MVC as an example. It goes to a particular controller action. It gets your data. It knows what views to render. It gets that view, and then it merges that data onto the view and sends down the DOM to the browser. Right? That's a typical flow. Angular is different because Angular, you make a request to the template page, right? And then you make a request to your server to get the data, right? So there are 2 requests and there are 2 responses. This might become like a bandwidth issue. So what Angular does is it caches all your templates, right? So you're getting it only for the first time, and subsequent times you're only requesting for data, right? So look at any application, or most applications on the website are read applications, right? Your news articles, your blog articles, your web applications, websites where you're seeing photos. The template to render that image or render the text is static. Only the data is different. So for example, browse SNP and config, right? The template to show a bunch of servers on the page, that is static. The template is static. Only the data is different. So the next time the user clicks go to page 2, the template is cached. Only thing you're getting is the data, right? There is a way to disable that, obviously. So for example, in cart checkout, if you say, well, I don't want user to cache the templates, I want them to be on the server side, so every time the user has to make a request. Fair enough, you can do that one as well. But for the most part, by default, it caches all your templates, right? So your calls are actually much thinner. Only the first time is you're seeing the double call happening. Okay. Internationalization and localization, your currency symbols, your date time formats, and something called as pluralization is taken care by Angular. Right? So we'll see that real quick here. Scripts. And see this I18N, that is the one that gives you all the locales, right? So I18N is, there are 18 letters in between in the word internationalization between I and N. So they have kind of reduced it. That way, when you take references of that, you don't have a 20-letter word every time. So what I was talking about is, let's load, right? So there, that is the way in which they want AM PM to be displayed. Those are the days. So when you're displaying complete days, that's the days. Those are the days for them. Those are the months that they mention. The short days, short month. Those are the dates for date formats for that region. Right? All of this is taken care by Angular. There is one more thing called pluralization. Right? So think of how you do it. You see it on Facebook, right? It says Narayan likes your link. Right? When you post something, it says Narayan likes your link. And then it says Sanjeev and Narayan like your link. And then it says Dinesh and 2 other like your link. So that is pluralization, right? You can get that handled in Angular, right? As part of internationalization. So on another place, so here what it is doing is you have plural category here. So for 0, it's 0, 1, and then 2, and then few, and then many, and then other, right? So it says for this region, there are only 2 of them set up. So it says if it is 1, use the 1 region, use the 1 section, and if it is other, you're just doing. So if at all we are rendering, it says Narayan likes your link, and then it says probably there are others who like your link, right? There are a few more who like your link, kind of a thing, right? So that is handled in Angular as well. Localization, all your custom or translated strings. Well, for an application like Dell, where we are serving a number of countries, it completely makes sense to have a content management system. But if you're going to say, well, I'm creating a website that does only English, US English, and French, then you're better off just doing your literals as resources. And then once the region is set, once the locale is set, Angular automatically does the translation for you. Right? I don't have the L10N in here, but I can just add that. Right? I can just add the NuGet package.
The client side itself.
Yes, you can, and your resources actually come down to the client side. Right? So that's another thing that we need to be, yes. But again, it's cached, so you're not doing it multiple times. It's the first time it comes, so that resource file comes, whatever region you've set into, you can see that and you can play with unmuted.
Cached means when it will make a fresh call. How long?
The first one, no, every time, right? So your this page, right? It doesn't call your AngularJS every time, right? Your resource file here is again a JS file, right? It's just a big JSON object. Right? For every key, just like we are doing with CMS, for every key there is a value to it. So it's French, it has a French value of hello or whatever it is, right? So that JS file will be included here.
If I'm making changes to the hello, I did a spelling mistake, I'm correcting it on the server side.
Right.
When will it get updated?
I think you'll have to do a Control F, Shift F5, get the fresh ones, just like now, right? If I do a Control Shift F5, it'll get the latest ones of everything.
So caching is from browser side.
That's the browser side. No,
It's not server side.
no, it's not.
Our browser internet.
Your local browser.
Can I set that some time? It's need to skip that template and get the new template.
Well, unless you are writing your own script, I don't know if Angular provides us that one.
I think so we can do lot of things. Like we can put some hash code, and next time we are matching that hash code. If it is new build and that hash code is not matching,
The file change, the E tag will change. E tag of the file.
And then the last modified will be changed.
Yeah, they can
So
change the E tag.
there are a lot of ways to get the.
Yeah.
So it's conditional get, right? It's conditional get. It checks if there is an updated version. If there is, then it will get the latest version, right? So it will be doing. That's what I'm guessing. I've never tried that feature. Just know that there is localization available for
Browser automatically do it for you, right? When it's find like new file is there, modified.
I think it
But
will
these
be-
are the templates.
Because it
Templates
is
can
already
be
happening
anywhere.
for other things, right? If you
Right.
change your JS
Yeah.
file,
Yeah.
forget about AngularJS, right?
Yeah.
Anything. Whenever you change your script file or
No,
anything.
some cases it will not always every time go to server and get it right.
Not every time.
Like cache for one day, it will not, for that entire day, it will be always used.
Exactly. So there is a way.
Temporary internet files, right? These are get downloaded on your local box and get
So-
clear it and it will be. Otherwise, I think it is very
No,
some.
those are all our technical point. As a user, I'm using the website. You set it to the cache for one day. In between, as I'm making some content translation change,
Yes.
it will not get updated to the client.
For that one day, yes. That is because your business has told that the caching has to be for one day, right? So you have that justification for business, and business knows that if any change you make will not get updated until the next day.
I
They are aware.
think here you doesn't mean caching means like that. It just
Browser side, it's just
coming
there
at
on
the
the browser.
client. It's coming at the client and
That's all.
stays there.
Yeah,
and
it just stays
client-
there.
Browser finds it, and
Yeah.
if it is not updated on server, probably it shows up
Yeah.
from there only
Yeah.
instead of downloading it again.
When we update a file on server, the e tag of the file will change, right?
There are so many things,
That's,
right?
that's what I'm saying. That means your request need to go and hit the server
Yes.
to get it, right?
Yes, every time
You're
there is a
not
request.
making the server
Yeah.
call at all.
No, you are. That is what a conditional get is, right? Conditional get is see if there is a latest version. If there is, get it. If not, the server will send back saying you have the latest version. So your response,
But you need what he's
But
saying.
that's again
we need to
a
refresh.
drawbacks, right? Every time. any
that happens in
request-
every application,
Every-
not just
every
Angular.
application.
Every
Yeah.
application that happens.
All the-
Conditional gets are happening everywhere.
Conditional get is automatically happen.
Yes,
or you need to put
yes, no, it's automatic.
See,
That is a
until
browser
you-
provided thing.
If you see UI framework or anything cached, files are cached there, right? So until you refresh it, it will not go on, right? It will not take the latest.
Right.
Same thing, like you need to refresh.
It's not an Angular thing. It's a browser thing. So conditional
Yeah.
get is provided by the browser to us. Right?
That's after the caching time is expired when it will call, right?
Well, see, there are multiple ways in which you cache, right? You can set an expiration date on a resource, right? You can say that my company logo, that resource will not change for the next 10 years.
Or you can set like always take the
Always get the latest one. You can
Always
set
get the latest.
everything that is server setting for you. Okay?
You
So
can
that
set
is the
now
browser
like-
settings also, right? On your browser, you go to the internet options, right? There are a lot of other options also, like when to basically get every time or not. I guess that options are also there.
But we cannot
In internet-
tell client like.
Yeah, we can't
I
tell
think
client to do
before
it.
said that
Client is, yeah.
They don't-
Yeah.
If they've set up that it should not basically check for the latest version, then it will not go and
Yeah.
bring
Yeah.
it down for
If
one
you use
client.
private mode, it will always take it.
It'll always get latest.
Private mode is always.
Yeah.
It won't, right?
No, we basically, I mean, recently we're doing this Home script analysis. We want to reduce the number of network calls. Means you need to put the cache time. My JavaScript not going to change until I deploy the new code, right?
Okay.
Till the next release, my JavaScript not going to change. I could set the expiry time or something.
Yeah.
So they'll never make another next time the network call. Only the first page I download it. Subsequent pages is always ready for my.
Yes, set the
From the-
expiry date to future time.
Yes.
But how will you specify the JavaScript expiration date in your HTML?
No, HTML. No, that's why I'm saying it's a
HTTP
server
headers.
thing.
It's a server side.
It's a server side change.
Server side you can
You make that change on the server
Raw
side.
download, it will read the header side.
But you can put a query statement, version, this version will get stay. If you want to
See, that's what there are-
use
there
a
are-
header, HTTP header. Check whether it's
If you have it in JavaScript, put a new version.
You can do it in multiple ways.
Templates and
If we
JavaScript.
are going to use the
But
caching
data-
time, to get the benefit means I need to avoid the number of round trip calls to
Round trip is what? Round trip is what? It's not getting your entire resource. It's only getting saying, hey,
No,
this
he's
version
saying
is
the
saying.
This
Still,
application.
if I'm hitting from China to my US server, that's where the time delay, right?
Yes, every time.
My
You just do
server will
del.com.
respond to it.
Shan, you just do del.com now and then go to the next time, now next page, the FAV icon, there is a conditional get happening for that.
Is that the right one or a wrong one?
It's right, it has to happen. Every application is doing that.
But some-
Unless Dell server has a saying that okay, the favorite icon should not expire in I don't know whatever 10 years. But if that is not set up, you can see that on the resource.
There's a shield group, right? The
Yeah,
XCP,
yeah.
where itself is expressed.
Okay?
That will happen. The difference is that what is the size of your response coming back? Or like you have server-side caching, then probably first request at your server takes 10 milliseconds, but the next request, your server-side caching is there, so it will take 1 millisecond and return the response. But same response might be coming.
No, think about this. Maybe you guys are right, but my server will have good infrastructure, right? whatever request comes, we will get it in a millisecond. Only the network, it's
Yes.
time to reach our server, it's take a long time, right? Especially China, it's need to cross the China firewall, all those things.
Yeah, you need to put one data center in China also.
Or we go for something like Akamai.
CDN.
That is there. That is for other some types of patterns. Yeah.
So Akamai is basically for static
Someone
content,
turn on
right? Not for
So JavaScript and all, and
Text
those
file.
templates, these are static templates.
Yeah.
Static
Text
templates.
file.
We can put it in
Yes.
CDN images and these templates.
I think jQuery
Yeah,
putting
but
in a CDN.
problem is, main problem is like data. Is correct? Like if I'm changing some text, how it is updated, that's the
His
problem.
concern is that request only going for checking itself, it should not go. That's
Yeah.
what he saying. Because I am
You
saying
can set up
by-
that one too,
yeah.
right? You can set up that
So
one.
even just to check whether latest is there or not, it should not do that. Because I know that it is already latest. I don't want to basically get it latest even though it is there.
Another way, I think within from JavaScript, there's a way to load the script file, right? So that time you can check all this like expiration, all this and load without refreshing it.
or-
Alright, guys, time out. Like that's another session. Back to Angular. Okay, so security concerns. I said earlier that Angular being a client side, it only works with your server for all the security concerns, except for XSS. So by default, Angular escapes all HTML. So I'm just trying to, right. So now when I do a refresh and do that piece, with that, that's escaped value, right? It's escaped value. It's just ampersand GT ampersand LT for you. Browser is rendering. It's not rendering it as a script. So what that means is it's searchable, right? It's just text for it. It's just pure text for it. But what if you say, well, I want to be able to search, right? I mean, I want to be able to add some HTML, and I know that the resource that is sending me is a safe resource. You'll still have issues. So what you do is you inject another resource called sanitize. I have to add a reference here. Right. Okay, so before we go there, now if we look at the HTML, that particular element, right? So you are seeing the script element, the script text in there, right? You are seeing that in there. So what we can do is I've added that here. I've added ng sanitize here, and then instead of using the double curly syntax, I'm going to do, oops, not the right one. I'm going to do it here. There you go. So now you see that the script element has been removed and you're seeing the HTML there. So you have the ability, Angular allows us that ability to show the HTML if you are sure. So you are taking a responsibility that data will not get injected, right? But if you still want that freedom, you can still do it. Now what sanitize does is it removes your script, the style tags, it removes them. It also removes any place which takes source as property,
Only
so your
HTML.
image,
Only HTML.
right? So and then your use map. So early on we used to do this. We have a map, we have an image, and that we can create a coordination of the area and then say click only this part is clickable. So it removes all of that. So that's why it sanitizes the HTML for the HTML to be rendered. So it has removed the script tag for that particular reason. Okay, so for the other ones, Angular requires help from the servers. So JSON injection, it requires that piece prefixed before your response comes back, and Angular will remove that piece. Right? For authentication, you can use something called a response interceptors. Once your response comes back, before your application gets it, there is a response interceptor that looks at it and says, okay, this is a 401, which means user is trying to access an authenticated resource, And then when you get that, you can redirect to the login page, right? So that's kind of the, it's not a hack, but it's not a direct way either. Right? So for XSRF, you're saying for the first time the user makes a GET request, server adds that token to your header with a unique value for it, and every subsequent calls that the client makes to the server, it sends back that header with that unique value. So it goes to the server checks it and says, okay, now I know this guy and I can give access to this guy. So I don't have examples for the security ones except for this one. Now let's look at kind of an example that does a lot more things. Okay, so this application is called as a GitHub application. Who's that? So GitHub. So this is an application to store your recipes, create new recipes, share them, and all those things. So I can go click on them, edit them, go back and create a new one. Something, and then I'm saying test, and do a save. I'm taken to the view of it, the ID is showing here, and then I go to the recipes list, I'm seeing that. And then the cool thing is this, right? So I can take that URL, it works. So your URLs are bookmarkable, right? Angular provides us that. And then one more thing we can see here is, look at that, that is working as well, right? So your forward and backward buttons are working. So kind of a nice feature that is required by everyone, required by every user. So I can again go in there and do a delete. Now I'm only seeing this one. So that is the application. So the first thing I'll show is I'll show you the caching part, right? So I've refreshed the page. So look at that. So I made a call to recipes. That was a server call. I have an MVC application running in the backend. I'll just show that. So it got me back that collection, and then I made a call to the list.html, which is my template, right? And now I'm going to click on a recipe. Now this time I've made a call to the recipes server, right? So that is my call, and that I got the response. And now I've downloaded the view.html, right? This is the template that is required. Look now, if I go back to my recipe list, it's only making that server call. So the client is already, the template is already there, right? The same thing for new recipe. When I make a new recipe, I got the recipe form. That is the template that's required. And then when I go back, click on something and go for edit, I'm only making server call, data calls. I'm not making template calls. So that is, it's lightweight, and in the long run you'll see much more benefits, right? So you'll see a lot of benefits of that. Okay, let's see anything else here. Okay, let's see how this application is wired up. So first I have, let me go to the controller. Go back. Okay, so again I have I'm declaring a module GitHub, and I'm injecting those resources, right? So I need directives, I have some directives, I have some services, and I'm going to call the ng route to set up my routing for this application. One more thing I just want to show. Now keep observing here. I don't know if I can show it any way better. So look at that, it showed loading there, right? Right, that's my directive, and I'm going to show how that is being implemented. Okay, so it's called as Butterbar, right? I don't know why, I just took this example from the book that I was working on. So it's called as a Butterbar. What it's doing is, by default, hide that element, right? And then you listen to a couple of events. The first one is route change start. So anytime a new route is being kicked in, show that link, show that element, and once you get the route change success event, then hide it, right? I'm adding it on the root scope because I want this behavior on every scope element, on every page, right? So that is how I can implement this. Now this piece is completely agnostic of your application. You can literally take this piece, paste it in your code, and boom, you can have that setup, right? It's not depending on any data, it's not depending on any network calls, anything. It's just saying I'm listening to those events. That's all it's doing, and Angular fires them by default. Okay, so that's the directive. So you have a completely reusable and standalone piece for your UI. The second one is a very simple one. It says focus. I have it as an attribute, and then all it does is sets the focus on a text element. Okay, so coming back to our controllers. So we saw what directives are. Let's see what our services are doing. Okay, so I have 3 of them here, and I said we'll be using a factory. Again, I have a module called services. I'm injecting the ng resource in there. Now, what the first one does is it creates an object module and then specifies a URL for it. So instead of doing that every time, I can just use recipe service dot whatever, right? So we'll just see that in the next one. And then if there is an ID passed to it, it puts that ID. So when we saw in our application, it says recipe/1. It gets that value. If recipes doesn't exist, it's just making the call to /recipes. Right? I have another service called multi-recipe loader. Right? So my recipes. So there is something called as promises. Angular uses promises heavily. It's not an Angular concept. Even your Ajax calls are using promises these days. So what a promise is it has a then function which takes 2 callback functions. If your network call, the async call, is successful, it'll call one callback function with the success callback. If it's failed, it's call the other one. But in either case, it'll guarantee you that it'll call one of the other. It cannot guarantee you when it's going to make that call, but in either case, it'll make one of them. Right? So in this case, I have a query function here. Query is just doing it for /recipe, and by default, query, the general sense of query is to get a bunch of items. Right? That's what a query is. So I'm saying get the query, and whatever value that your promise resolves to, right, which is the output of that or a network failure. If you get the output of that one, put the value in this recipes object. If it is failed, then call the reject and then send me back that information. Right? That's kind of what promises are. Don't worry about promises. All this is doing is, if that is successful, put the value here. If it's failed, put the value there. That's all it's doing. Right? That's all your query is doing. Query again is it's taking 2 functions as your parameters, right? It's taking 2 of them.
It's similar to async await.
Pretty much, yes. You're just firing the events and say whenever you get the update, do this thing. That's all it's doing. And then your recipe loader returns a promise, right? Because it's not returning the actual object. It's returning the promise, and when it's done, it'll call your resolve. When it's failed, it's called the reject. Okay. Same thing on the recipe loader. I'm doing a get here. Now I'm getting these functions because that is a resource, right? Your recipe service is actually a resource, and resource has query, get, delete, save, and all those functions by default. Right? So it does your get, post, delete, all those things. Right? Same thing here. If you get the value, and I'm passing a specific recipe ID here, so it will be recipe/1 or 2 or whatever. So if you get me the recipe, put that in this recipe object or variable, and if not, just give me that response. In either case, give me the promise object back. Coming back to my controllers. Okay, so this is where I'm creating my route. So here I'm saying when the URL is / use that controller and that template, and get me the try to resolve the recipe loader. So the instance gives us a promise, and what this is saying is the output of the promise, whether success or failure, either a collection of your recipes object or the text message gets stored into the recipes object. Right? So that is kind of.
Is it possible to do I'm not getting a recipe for one call, but multiple locations?
Here, you're doing a service call, right? That's not the job of your routing. That's not the job of your controller. Getting all the data from wherever you want to do it is a service job. You can write your service any which way you want. Okay. So let's see what list controller is doing. So again, that is very similar syntax that we used. The only thing is we are passing these recipes. That is that object. Right? Angular references them by strings. So it says, oh, okay, I know what this recipes is. So it is the return value of that promise, and I am going to set the scope as recipes. Okay. We are doing very similar thing for your edit, right? And here I'm just getting the recipe loader, which is just one item, and I'm saying use that as the template. View control, again recipe loader, use that as a template. For new, when the user goes to /new, it's a new page, it doesn't require any data, so I'm saying just use the new controller in the template. No matter what the user types, what else the user types, take the user back to the home page. Right? That's what that otherwise is doing. If none of these make sense, then take the user back to. This is pretty much how we set up routing in MVC, right? My view controller is doing the same thing. It's getting that recipe object and then setting it on the scope, and then it has an edit function. We'll see this in the view, and when you click on edit, it takes the user to that edit page. Same thing with edit. It's setting the recipe object on the scope, and it's doing two of them. It's doing save and remove. Right? For save, it takes the user back to the view of that recipe, and for delete, it can't do that, so it's taking the user back to the home page. New controller has a save function, right? And then your ingredients. Right? So when I go to new or edit, I can add more ingredients or remove them. That is being handled by the add and remove functions. Right? That's what is wired up. So it's actually calling the add and remove ingredient when the user clicks on those buttons. Right? So what it's doing is it's just saying add another one to the collection. Right? So that's pretty much what it's doing here. It's removing one. Okay. Let's look at let's just look at the controller first. My app start, my route is just saying controller/id. I don't even want I don't want the action method here because that's the only action method I have, and I'm going to the recipes controller, and the ID is an optional parameter. That's the only route I have set up. So what is that doing? It's saying I'm using HTTP cache as my repository. If it exists, then read that as a collection. If not, create two of those two recipes, and then add them, and then insert that into cache. Right? So that's why you're seeing those two. And the third one that comes gets actually stored inside that cache. So my get is this. So if ID is null, if the ID is not null, it tries to get that particular ID. And if you say ID/100, just to get back some response, I'm giving back the zeros. I mean, this is just business logic kind of thing. That is flawed business logic right there. Right? If the ID is null, however, that means the user is trying to get the entire collection, in which case the user is doing the query call, right? Recipe service.query. Now my post is doing three things here. If ID is null, in which case this is an add, so it creates the value for an ID and then adds it to the collection. Else it's either doing a delete or an edit. So again, I'm setting a delete it property to be true. If that is the case, then it removes it. If not, it updates the current value to the collection, and in either case, it updates your cache. Okay, that's what my controller is doing.
This is an API controller or normal controller?
Just a regular controller. It's a regular MVC controller. Right? It's a regular MVC controller.
Since you are just passing a JSON object and doing it, so
I can do API controller as well, right? Now let's look at the view. Let's go with the sorry.
In case of last
Yeah, we'll get to that. Right? We'll get to that. So here is the page. So that is my butter bar. That's my directive. Right? So directives can either be attributes or they can be elements themselves. So I can set up the directive to say angle brackets butter bar. I can add that in that way as well. So the only thing Angular in this page is not, we don't have any controller here or anything. The only thing there is this ng view, right? Because what controller needs to be in effect is controlled by our routing, right? So I don't have to put that on the page. Now whatever template the routing says gets injected here. That's why I just have ng view here, right? Sorry, say that again.
Go back to that routing list.
JavaScript.
There.
So how like NGV will find out here automatically? Because we
Template, he already defined template.
So whatever value is there in the template URL, there is also another property called template where you can actually create your HTML, right? You can concatenate.
It's a placeholder, like.
It's a placeholder, right? So whatever value,
You can inject the template.
so whatever view you are getting here gets injected into that ng view. So that's what it's saying. Saying, okay, is the route giving me a template URL? Yes. Is that view valid? Yes. Then I'm going to inject that view. Okay. I don't know if I went through this. I had the same things for my edit and view and new. Right? Oh, I think I did go through that. So that is my ng view. So that is where the view is getting installed. Right? It's being injected. The other ones are list. List is just an ng repeat, and I'm using ng href. What ng href is if I had used the regular href, it would have created just that URL for me if ID is null. But ng href waits till Angular loads, and then only it creates that. That way you don't have invalid URLs. Right? So it's just a repeat with an ID and a title. Right? That's my list.
So what is the best practice for using templates? Putting in a single file or calling as per usage. So that, which is the best practice? So first scenario, if I put in a single file, I have one content server.
What?
Second scenario, I have less loading machine. See, templates was
Right. So the reason why you
best
want, the reason why you want to segregate it is because actually the way Angular asks us, and I've not done in any of the projects I've not done here, any of the examples I've not done. Angular asks you to break your applications not by controllers or directives or anything. It asks you to break them by features.
So, okay, so suppose I'm going on a first page, right? It is required 2 or 3 templates.
Right.
In place of calling them separately, I can call them. I can add them
In your
same
view,
pages.
right?
Yeah. As a
Right.
view.
What if your list or something is required elsewhere? You'll have to add that code again.
Yeah.
Reusability, right?
Reusability is not there.
Right. Of course, you can create one page with all of those things.
If we generate an HTML from our server side, then in that case it's already usable because
Right.
it's a separate piece of code. Right?
Your HTML is coming from
But that way we can reduce the server call.
maybe sometimes
Yeah.
after some time maybe we need some bundling of STL.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Template.
Yeah.
Sure.
We can do that.
Yeah. But then why are you bundling? Why are you getting all of your HTML when the user is only doing a certain thing?
Because we need only single call.
Yeah, reduce the
Right.
call means you pay your
Reducing-
faster.
There is a call,
You
but
can
at the
cache
expense of data.
Gmail is doing same thing. It will like it has some progress bar. It used to download all templates
Maybe
and
background
everything
Probably,
at
yeah.
one shot.
Okay.
And then like,
Okay. So for the most demos I've seen is they use separate views. They use separate views.
I think that way we can control some MVC on server side, right? Like, I guess separate a web partial view and then inject it anywhere.
that's the architecture.
Yeah.
You get-
And that
Well,
will
if you're doing it the
follow.
MVC way, then why are
We
you
can reduce the
Okay, so I was going through list. I was done with list. My recipe form is okay. So there are some interesting things here. I have two titles here, right?
Yeah.
One is edit and add. So I have ng show for recipe edit ID edit recipe, which basically says if ID has a value, then show recipe. If ID does not have a value, then show add. Right? That's how I'm doing the switching.
Okay.
This way, the benefit of doing this way is that your view is dependent on the state of your application, right? The state of your model. Right? Rather than doing JavaScript and saying, okay, the user is new now, so I have to add this class and then remove that class. Instead of that, you are doing it the declarative way, and directives push you to doing things declarative way. Right? So we talked about all those methods, right? Remove ingredient, add ingredient, all those things, and then you can do some form validation. So I have said that this is a required field. The title is required field. right? So if it's not there, your recipe form dot invalid will be false, right? So it says it's invalid, and then your save button will not be enabled. Look at that.
The problem I find with this one Angular is like is tightly binding the HTML with their directives, right?
That's a good
it is visibility is right. That's
No,
the same
your
HTML
view,
You have reusable templates.
your reusable template itself, right? Your directives themselves can call other directives.
Can you go switch to code? If you see like ng click is there with the some function, okay, that is it. Okay.
See,
That
this is calling your scope. That is calling the remove on the scope. Okay. So it's you can, so this ingredient stuff, right? This whole ingredient stuff, you can extract it and put it, make it another directive.
okay, so HTML5 only, so I don't think it will affect, right? So just try the additional time.
Right. So it's just,
I think in knockout also it is same thing, right?
yes.
So basically the whatever control you are binding to.
So separation of concerns,
Inside
right?
that you can directly call
Yeah.
the methods like remove and all those.
Separation of concerns, right? Separate all your HTML, CSS, or no dependency should be there. This way we are making like tightly binding.
You put that right, otherwise.
Sanjeev, how are you
Now
going
in
to,
JavaScript, you see, right? We get that in place of
So
doing
you
it here in a
can
JavaScript
see, you
file.
can take all
right?
this code, you can remove
Even
everything.
with-
You can write another JavaScript file
Yeah,
and basically
yeah,
manipulate DOM
yeah.
and inject from there all these things. But
That
the same
is
thing,
more-
that is more difficult because it's from the code.
This
you
is a lot
can't
more
figure
readable,
out
right?
What is happening?
this is a lot more readable.
Because you're loading,
this is
you're
more
attaching the event dynamically, right? So that is.
Right. So when I click on
Anyway,
the,
these are the tags, actually HTML tags. They are not a function calling, right? On click, this is not an on click function. So it's already, I think,
Right.
fine. It should work without even JavaScript disable, the page will render.
yeah. So I'm doing an ng submit when I do the save. So I'm calling the save function on the scope. What ng submit does, it is automatically prevents the default post back, right? So when you do a submit, it does a post back. So ng submit prevent default action, I think is what it's called. Okay, so that is my recipe form, and that's my view form, which is basically saying if there are no ingredients, show that text, and if there are ingredients, show the ingredients. So, and then you have the edit function here. When you click on it, you're again doing an ng edit, ng submit. So it's taking you to /edit/id. So that is the example. Any questions? Just want to make sure I covered everything. Yeah. Any questions? Routing, anything at all? No?
So how Angular work with
Yes, I'm going to show that. Say.
so how Angular gel with other library like Prototype or some other one?
So it works with Backbone. I have not heard anything about it not working with Prototype, and in the next version they're going to make it work with lot other frameworks that are available and libraries that are available. Okay, and then their aim is to say that they should not be a reason why it should not work with other frameworks and platforms.
Yeah.
That I don't know how they're going to handle that. I don't know how they're going to
No,
handle.
they are saying like Angular is one framework, right? For doing
Yeah.
everything.
So exactly.
Yeah.
So knockout plus this. Well, I don't know.
Again,
If
become
you're doing
knockout
Angular,
plus.
why would you also do knockout?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if Angular
Yeah,
knockout is doing some special way which Angular does not. I don't know. Yeah, the other combinations. Yeah.
Like nodes are, or maybe Backbone is saying, or
Backbone is working, and Node.
Prototype is just additional wrappers, additional
Okay.
functions. So I think it should work, right?
Okay. So coming to the testing of your application. Angular is highly testable. Right? They aim when they started writing Angular, which is like around 1,400 lines of code. Is that right, Manshu?
Yeah.
1,400 lines of code, the entire framework. Is that 1,400 or 14,000?
No.
32,000 this one, and second one was
Ember.
Ember was
32.
more than 4,000.
More Amber is more, right?
14. 1,500 or 15,000 lines, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, so within that you have the entire framework. We'll be using Karma as the tool. Although Karma is not an Angular tool, you can use Karma just separately to test any of your JavaScript and things like that. The Karma configuration can be integrated with your build script. So you run your build, it runs your unit tests, the JavaScript unit tests. That way you know. I'll be using Jasmine because Karma understands Jasmine. It also understands QUnit and Mocha, but I'll be using Jasmine to do both end-to-end and unit testing. So end-to-end test is, we had this scenario in a cart application where the user comes to the cart page and then he updates the quantity as 2, tabs out, and he should be able to see an update link just below that. So when the user clicks on that, post-batch should happen. That was not happening. We got an error. I mean, we got a defect and we had to fix that. And then the tester said, okay, I'm going to make it 2, tab out, and now I'm seeing the update link. I go back, make it 1 again, then the update link should go away. And it's a valid scenario, but we never thought of it because we never tested that. Now with Angular, you can test even that at that granularity, right? You can test anything end to end. You're actually running, you're doing your automated tests right on your machine. Let's see some of the tests. Okay, so I have installed Karma and I've kind of set it up. So basically, I'm telling Karma to watch all of those files. I'm not going to make any of the changes to those, but anytime I make a change to any of these 2 files, it runs all the tests again. Right, that way you're running it on command prompt. That way you're literally writing code and making sure that tests are all passing. Right? You can do the true TDD style development here, and then that's what is telling me to run the test again. Keep watching. Anything else here? No. Okay. So I'm just going to say so it reads that file, and then it gets all those references. It actually loads the browser to get a context. There you go. One of one, and it's success. Let's see what the test is actually doing. So spec is the naming convention that people are kind of using. So I say product controller spec. So it means I'm writing unit test for that module. So this is the Angular syntax. Sorry, this is the Jasmine syntax. It says describe unit test for product controller. It's actually describing a feature, but I'm just testing everything for product. So before each is like your setup function. That says before you run each test, create a module called prod. That's the module that our application is running. And then again one other before each that says inject the controller creator and a root scope object. Right? So you're injecting those values in there. I'm setting it into the controller constructor into a local variable, and I'm reading that scope in again a local variable. Now I'm saying it should have 3 products. So I'm creating a controller constructor, calling it as product controller, and passing that scope that my root scope created. I'm adding 3 of those products, and I'm attaching it that model to scope, and here I'm saying expect that to be 3. Right, that's the assertion. Expect is the assertion, right? So I'm saying scope.products.length should be 3. So my test has passed. So if I make change here, go back, the test has failed. So it's telling me expected was 3 and to be was 4. Go back, do the change again, the test has passed. So I've heard it many times that Karma works really well with Chrome, but I'm sure you'll see some delays when I'm doing the demo here. Okay, so that is the unit test. Let's do some end-to-end tests. So Angular provides this. Angular does all the end-to-end tests in Angular scenario. So that gives us the framework for doing all of the stuff. So I go to the page, I just say view in browser. That's just a regular HTML page. Look at that, it's running all the tests. And if you saw that at the bottom, it was actually loading your HTML. The controller page is loading in an iframe, right? So the first one says it should have 9 rows of data. That one passed because we had 9 rows in our controller.html. And then it says once I filter for laptop, it should show 3 elements. So I'm doing a t body of tr. So I'm actually doing it on the DOM, right? And the third one is kind of really cool, right? So your business requirement was said that even elements should have some kind of background color. If we go back to our CSS, here I have a rule that says nth child of E1 should have that color. So the RGB for that is, so the first one is the alpha. So the RGB for that is 255, 248, 220. Now let's see, and we saw that the RGB value is that. Right? So that is what the background for that. Let's go to the scenarios, and here is where I'm doing my test. So again, I'm saying before each, go to the controller page, navigate to the controller page, right? So that way I'm testing, I'm starting my test fresh every time. And then I'm doing T-body TR. So just within, I can't do TR because there will be a header and a footer. So T-body TR, get me the count of that, and that should be 9. Right? So you can run, so you're saying, and you're also simulating user input. When the user enters, so input is not your HTML input, it's actually the Angular scenario function, right? So you're saying, get me the input which has a sub model of search on it, right? And the user enters the value laptop there, right? You're now simulating user input. And then I'm doing a wait here because there is some animation running. Sometimes it works, sometimes it fails, so I've excluded, I've added that explicitly. So the animation is for 1 second, so I've asked it to wait for 1.1 seconds. And then I'm doing a T-body of TR, and the count should be 3. And the third one, I'm saying T-body TR of nth child, get me the second one, get me the background color, and that value should be 258, 255, 248, 220. Right? This is true end-to-end testing, and you can run them on your Karma. Right? It again requires browser to get the context, then execute F3 of 3. Right? So you can run both your end-to-end test Karma and your unit test Karma in different windows simultaneously while you are writing code. That way, as and when you fail something, you get to know instantaneously. Do more tests on the second application. So I'm just doing Karma start. In this one, let's say I want to test cross-browser functionality, right? So I have asked it to load IE and Chrome. So that's IE, and Chrome is running in the back, right? And now when I look at it, IE all the test passes and Chrome all the test passes. Let's just look at, okay, let's just keep the test running. I can see what the tests are doing here. Again, before each, load the module of GitHub, and Jasmine allows me to create custom expects, custom asserts, right? So assert to be true, assert to be false. In this one, I'm saying in order for me to check the JSON objects, I need to do it Angular equals. I can't just do equals that JSON provides. So it says to equal data, and that's the extension I've written. Now here I'm doing a list controller call. I'm saying inject me a bunch of things, create a new route scope, and then assign the scope there. Then I'm saying your controller, which required the recipes which you're getting from your promise of multi-recipe. I'm just saying, okay, make sure the value is that, right? Just injecting the value because this is just unit test. So first one, it should have a list of recipes. There, it has a list of recipes. And then now I'm going to test my routes. This what I'm injecting here are the real routes. So I'm saying when the route is slash, controller should be list controller, and your template URL should be that. You can argue that this is not a unit test per se, it's more like an end-to-end test. Sure, but you can test both of them. You can test your routes. So if any time user makes a change, you're failing your test, and then you say, oh yeah, I can't change that because I'll be breaking a feature, right? So you can test your routes as well. Now let's test the multi-recipe loader. I'm creating a mock of that, and instead of HTTP provider, I'll be sending in the HTTP backend, right? And I am setting expectations on that. So if you expect, hey, I'm saying, hey mock, if you expect a get on that particular URL, give me back that response, right? So there is no network call that's happening. As again, as always, it returns a promise, and then once the promise is successful, it populates my recipes object, which will be that. So Angular, the mock version of it allows me to control when the network call should be faked. So that way I'm saying before that my recipe should be undefined, which is that. And once I make the flush, once I flush the call, I should have the value. So I'm doing 2 equal data, and that is the value I'm having here. Right? So that's how you can test. And then I have verify no outstanding expectation, and that. So if I don't do that, and if I don't do those 2 lines, my test will still be passing, right? But those will fail, those will throw an exception, because it says, hey, you have an expectation, but you never fulfilled those expectations. So that's why it says no outstanding expectation and no outstanding requests are waiting to be passed. Right? So that's why you do that after each. I'm testing my edit controller here. Again, I'm injecting a bunch of things. I'm injecting the recipe service and all those things. And I'm saying should save the recipe. Okay? So if you expect a post on that URL with that data, respond back with that information. Right? Some mock information. So what I'm doing, I'm going to the edit page, and then I'm doing a save, and I still expect the path to be /edit because I've not done a flush. Once I do a flush, it should take me back to view /1, and that 1 is because that is the 1. Right? That is the route that I've set up. I'm doing the same thing for remove as well. So once I flush it, it should take me back to the home page. Right? So those are my unit tests, and you can run your unit tests in a browser as well. So I showed that you can run your end-to-end tests in Karma. Now you can run your unit tests in browser, and if you can filter it out, right? Just run me the list control tests. Just run me that particular test. You can do all of those things. But I somehow find it easier to do it on Karma because it's constantly watching my code. Yes, and let's run the end-to-end test. Okay, so here I'm testing my directive. Should not show the butter bar once the page is loaded. So if you look at our code, our butter bar, where is my code? There's my code. Right? Our butter bar is the first div on the page. Right? This is the first div on the page. So I'm saying, get me the first display property of my first div, and then it should match none. Right? By the time your tests are running, your page is already displayed. And your business requirement is that you should show at least 1 recipe on the page. So li count should not be 0. And then you can say navigate the user to new, right? Take the user to the new page, and then you can check if the edit and add HTML tags are shown appropriately. So for new, you should not show the edit, but you should show the second one. And for the edit, you need to show the first one, not the second one. Right? So that is kind of the control you can do. You can as well move these 2. Let's look at the code here. So there it is. So here I'm saying for each test, go to that browser, go to the index page, and then when it comes to the third one, I'm also doing that. You can as well extract these add recipe tests to a new describe, and instead of multiple browser navigates, you can just say go navigate to /new. Right? And then you can write more tests there. When the user is on the new page, the delete button should not be shown. Makes sense. When there is no text in the title page, which is a required one, your save button should be disabled. You can do all of those tests. Right? You're writing end-to-end tests right now. Right? So those are some of the tests I've written here. Any questions? Anything anywhere in the session? Right? So that's the end of the session. Those are the references I have. A couple of Pluralsight courses, couple of books, and the third link here shows how to set up Karma. That course is testing client-side JavaScript. Right? So that will tell you how to set up Karma and start using it. That is a very good tutorial on Angular. The documentation on the Angular side is pretty good, although it's still evolving, and people are saying, this one makes more sense. So you can actually go and improve the documentation. So that is my session.